Good evening. Welcome back out tonight to our evening service. It's good to see everybody out. First song tonight will be number 191. 191, Home of the Soul. We'll sing all three verses.
Thank you. Discouragement is something that we all have to deal with from time to time, and when it does roll around, it's good if we know how to handle it. It's good if we know how to recognize it and not let it get the best of us, and because it can get worse and worse and worse over time if we don't get a control over it and take care of it by different measures. It can come with loneliness in a person's life. It can come when a person has health problems or financial problems or family problems or work issues. Many things can come about because of this, and it hurts. We don't like to be discouraged, but yet it's something that everybody has to deal with. It comes to the best of people. It comes to the most faithful Christian, and it can take its toll on an individual. We find individuals in the Bible that were discouraged from time to time. You take, for example, David, when he was running from Saul and he had to go hide out in the cave, that had to be discouraging to him. And yet he made the most of it and it let it get him down, and he wrote many of his Psalms that he wrote in the book of Psalms. You can tell that he was discouraged, and yet how he needed to be uplifted by the Scriptures and by God himself. John the Baptist had to be one that had to have discouragement. As John was in prison, knowing that his days were short, he began to wonder, is Jesus the one? Is he the Son of God? And he was getting discouraged over this. So he sends some of his disciples to go to Jesus and say, are you the one? And Christ said, yes, I'm the one. Look at everything I'm doing. I'm fulfilling the Scriptures. And he was encouraged by that to know that his efforts were not for nothing. The apostles, they got discouraged from time to time, especially on that Friday when the Lord was crucified until Sunday morning when he was resurrected. Probably during that 3-day period, they were thinking, well, what do we do now? What do we do from here? What if he isn't going to be raised? And all these things probably going through their mind about their future and what was holding for the future. But one thing about discouragement, it always comes at a time when we are just on the mountaintop, maybe having a good experience for things, and eventually we can't stay up there all the time, and we come down into that valley, and that's when discouragement hits. In Matthew 14:27, but immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, be of good cheer, it is I, do not be afraid. Speaking to his disciples, he's telling them to be of good cheer. As he's writing here, they were quite discouraged over some things, but he tells them, I am with you. But one of the greatest individuals that we have in the Scriptures to learn from when it comes from to be discouraged is that of Elijah and how to overcome it. We read of his story in 1 Kings chapter 19, and his life was certainly mentioned quite often in the Bible. As a matter of fact, there's no other prophet mentioned more times in the New Testament than Elijah. And we learn a lot from his life, and he had moments of his high points, and then he had moments of low points, but he still was a great man of God, and God helped him through those terrible times. But you might ask, well, how could he have such a discouraging view of things sometimes when he was such a great prophet of God? And he was that. And he had one tremendous victory in 1 Kings chapter 18. He went up against 450 prophets of Baal. And in doing so, the children of Israel were confused. Are we going to worship Baal, or are we going to worship the true God? And Elijah comes on scene. He says, here's what we do. Let's see whose God is the greatest. So he tells these 450 prophets, I want you to build an altar, put you a bull on it, and call to Baal for him to set that altar on fire. Well, they do exactly that. Well, they begin to build an altar, put the bull on it, and they're running around calling on Baal in a frenzy way. They're cutting themselves, and from early morning to noon. But yet, Baal never hears. He never listens to the plea. Elijah says to him, why don't you cry out louder? Maybe he's hard of hearing. Maybe he's asleep. Maybe he's out of town. Maybe he's busy. Cry out some more. And boy, they go after it more and more, and yet nothing happens. Baal never shows himself. Well, we know that. There is no such thing as only in name only, but yet he did nothing for them. And then Elijah builds him an altar. He picks the stones out. He puts the bull on the altar there. He takes water. He pours all over the bull and and the wood and material they're light it with. He digs a trench around the altar, fills it full of water, and then he calls on God. And before the words leave his mouth, lightning, or at least we say lightning, fire from heaven comes down and sets that altar on fire. And not only does it set it on fire, it destroys that altar. Meaning the bull is evaporated, the stones turn into dust, the water around in the trench, it is licked up, as the scriptures say. There's nothing left, a pile of dust. And then the people of Israel realize we've been worshiping the wrong God. It is only one God and one true God, and they realize that. And then the 450 prophets of Baal, they're taken out and slaughtered with a sword and killed. Well, Elijah here, he's on top of the world. He's finally showing the people who the true God is. A great demonstration. How wonderful. But word gets back to Jezebel through her husband Ahab. He was there. He witnessed all this. And she gets mad at Elijah. I'll show you what I'm going to do to you. And here's what the promise she made to him. 1 Kings 19 and verse 2. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, so let the gods do to me, and more also, if I do not make your life as one of them by tomorrow about this time. So she's going to kill him. If you're alive by this time tomorrow, good for you, but I'm going to do my best to kill you. 3 and 4. And when he saw that, he arose and ran for his life and went to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree, and he prayed that he might die and said, it is enough. Now, Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my fathers. One moment he's on top of the world, and then Jezebel makes a threat, and he hightails it out of there. He travels at least a day's journey, and I don't suspect that he's stopping here and there, enjoying the scenery. I figure he's in a full run, looking over his shoulder, because he knows that Jezebel is serious, and she catches up with him, at least those who are after him, they will slaughter him on the spot. So he runs and runs for a whole day, and finally under a broom tree, he stops and he prays, and he's ready to die. He's tired of running. Tired of running. Now, how could it be after such a great victory that this discouragement would come in, but yet that's the way it happens. It happens in all our lives. We can't be on the mountaintop all the time. We're going to come down. Let's say you've been needing a vacation, you take a vacation, and maybe for a week, well, you go back to work on that Monday after getting back, and so you got the blahs, don't you? You can't stay on that top all the time. You're going to come down into the valley at times. You're ready to make that big purchase. You're going to go out and buy a car, and boy, everything's great, and you feel on top of the world, and then when you sign that paper, that adrenaline in your body drops, and you begin to have some doubts. Did I do the right thing? Again, it's just part of life coming down. And standing up for truth, that can be discouraging when you don't have anybody standing beside you. When you're the only one that seems to have a logical understanding of what the scriptures have to say, and nobody else wants to hear it, and they're in opposition to you. Opposition from others is something that can discourage us. But yet we still need to stand for truth. Always remember that I'm not always going to be on that mountaintop. Opposition is going to come. Then there's exhaustion. As we saw in verse 4, he went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he prayed that he might die and said, it is enough. Now, Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my fathers. And as he lay and slept under a broom tree, suddenly an angel touched him and said to him, arise and eat. Then he looked, and there by his head was a cake baked on coals and a jar of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came back the second time and touched him and said, arise and eat, because the journey is too great for you. So he arose and ate and drank and went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights, as far as Horeb, the mountain of God. Exhaustion. running wide open, fear, somebody might catch him. He finally gets under that broom tree, and there he goes to sleep. But the angel awakens him, he goes back to sleep a second time, but this time he doesn't go to sleep. He's fully charged because the food, miraculous food here, he eats, and he doesn't really have to eat again for 40 days. Well, that'd be great. Wouldn't that cut down on your grocery bill? Eat one time every 40 days? But yet the angel knew, the Lord knew, he's got a big journey ahead of him, big journey, so he has to prepare him. Exhaustion, physical struggles can bring about discouragement. You ever notice sometimes when you're most tired, that's when everything begins to pile on? You come home, there's something wrong here, there's something wrong there. Everything begins to happen sometimes when you're at your tiredest. Again, exhaustion. That can cause individuals to be discouraged because we live in a busy world, and we are busy people. But for some reason, we think we have always got to have something to do. We always have got to be busy. And if we don't, we come across as being lazy, so we overdo ourselves, and sometimes we get exhausted. Elijah was exhausted. Children can exhaust us. You know how children are. Today, they got to be everywhere. You've got different, how many children you got, they all got to be somewhere at different times, and you can just be exhausted trying to keep up with them. Trying to go here, go there, and do this and do that. You can get exhausted in doing the Lord's work. I mean, you can do so much and maybe do a lot of great work, but times it will work on you, and you'll just say, I just got to stop and rest. There's nothing wrong with resting. There's nothing wrong with stopping, as long as we don't completely stop. Because discouragement can cause one to want to stop and do nothing. Galatians 6 and verse 9, and let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not lose heart. Do not grow weary. Doesn't mean you can't rest, can't stop some. Just don't let discouragement stop us whenever we have that moment of exhaustion. Don't let it happen. Health problems certainly is something that can bring about discouragement. They can limit an individual. You can't do what you once did. And don't forget about the caregiver. The caregiver can also become discouraged as well, especially to see their loved one in such a poor condition and how their life has changed. It changes everybody's life. It certainly does that. I think of what Job went through, how it changed his life tremendously, at least for the moment it did. At the time he was there, it changed his wife's life. It was terrible what he had to go through, and he was very much discouraged after all this was happening to him. But that's what can happen. Physical ailments certainly can wear one down. One may even want to quit. And that sort of ties into what Elijah was doing. Even though we don't see him as having any kind of sickness or really health problems, but it was wearing on him. It was working on him, having to always have this fear of somebody being behind him, somebody sneaking up on him, person behind this bush or that bush, who knows? But again, it can happen. Watch out for our health problems. 2 Corinthians 12:5, Paul had his infirmities. Of such a one I will boast, yet of myself I will not boast, except in my infirmities. I think most of his were brought about because of others mistreating him and beating him and doing all that they were doing, trying to kill him. But he's not the only one. Epaphroditus, he was a sick man. Timothy was a sick man as well. But it had to be discouraging. But it didn't let them stop doing the Lord's work. They continued, they battled through it in many ways that they could, and they got through it. Loneliness can be discouraging. Elijah was lonely. Out there in that wilderness by himself. He was lonely from a standpoint of nobody there with him, but he's also lonely from a standpoint of a spiritual case because he thought he was the only one left. I'm the only one alive here. Jezebel and the others have killed all the others, and I'm the only one that survived this. And you can get down sometimes thinking, I'm the only one. Not just in loneliness, but I'm the only one that's standing for what is right. I go to work, I'm the only one that's standing for what's right. Family, I get among family members, here we go. I feel lonely among family members because it seems I'm the only one that's standing for what's right. And it goes on. It can even be among your brethren, your own brethren. Because sometimes brethren can be mean, and they can be cruel, and you don't have anybody that's got your back. It can be difficult. So loneliness is something that can hurt when it comes to discouragement. Back to 1 Kings 19:9. And there he went into a cave and spent the night in that place. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" So he said, "I've been very zealous for the Lord God of hosts, for the children of Israel have forsaken your covenant, tore down your altars, killed your prophets. With the sword I alone am left, and they seek to take my life." Boy, he was very zealous, and he was. But now he feels like I'm the only one. It's just me. That can be a very lonely place. Just me. Of course, we've all been in situations of loneliness, but there are others, they're shut-ins, and those who care for shut-ins, they're lonely as well, and we can also be of encouragement to them. It's not the best way to get over your loneliness is to help somebody else get over theirs. Hebrews 13:5. Let your conduct be without covetousness. Be content with such things as you have, for he himself has said, "I will never leave nor forsake you." We got to remember that in times of loneliness. Elijah forgot about that. God did not forsake him. God was there with him all the time. All the time. So how did Elijah do it? How did he overcome this discouragement? Well, again, we just saw God's with us all the time. And Elijah's about to see that. And he comes across that in verse 11 of chapter 19. Then he said, this is God speaking, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore into the mountains and broke the rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind, and after the wind an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire a still small voice." So it was when Elijah heard it, that he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood in the entrance of the cave. And suddenly a voice came to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Get out of the cave, Elijah, is what the Lord's telling him. But why did the Lord do what he did here? Why did he bring about the wind and the earthquake and the fire? Why is he doing all these things? Again, he's wanting to show to Elijah, he's greater than anything Jezebel could ever come after him with. Can Jezebel bring about this fire or this earthquake? Can she bring about the wind? No. He's got God's protection, and God's going to show him that even greater and greater things. He has God's protection. You see, sometimes discouragement can cause us to forget about the future promises that God has made. There's coming a day when we have that new body, we won't be exhausted anymore. There's coming a day when our health will be so great, we'll never die again. There's no death in heaven. There's coming a day when we'll never be lonely, because with God in heaven, all that's there, all with him there, all these stuffs will be done away with. And we got to remember that. And Elijah forgot about those things, but certainly we got to remember. How did he do it? Again, those 7,000 prophets he was told about. They're still working, Elijah. Why have you quit? You got to get busy. And here's what the Lord told him in verse 15. Then the Lord said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when you arrive, anoint Hazael as king over Syria." And then verse 19, so he departed from there and found Elisha, the son of Shaphat, who was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen before him, and he was the 12th. And Elijah passed by him and threw his mantle on him. Get busy. Got plenty for you to do. He goes, he points the king of Syria. He finds Elisha, another great prophet, and he takes Elisha under his wing and begins to train him to be a great prophet that he was, and how great it was. When he got busy, he forgot about the discouragement and things that were there. Somebody once said that an overactive mind is caused by an underactive body, or discouragement. It's caused by an overactive mind, but because of an underactive body. We got to get busy. Got to get busy. So Elijah, again, he got busy. So the Lord showed him in many ways, don't worry about Jezebel. You're not alone. I can take care of you. After this event happened, you go forward 20 years. And where do we find Elijah then? 2 Kings 2 and verse 11. Then it happened, as they continued on, this is Elijah and Elisha talking, and talked, that suddenly a chariot of fire appeared with horses of fire and separated the two of them, and Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven. The greatest of the prophets, and God takes him home. He never has to die. What encouragement that is, to know you don't have to go through this. And God carried him on home, and Elisha saw this, and he was quite upset about it and everything, but Elisha got busy as well, doing what the Lord would have him to do. We can accomplish great things. Again, Elijah, number one prophet spoken of in the New Testament. And yet he had his days of discouragement. We're going to have our days of discouragement. But yet think of Elijah and pull out of it like he did. And remember his life. And remember the Lord carried him home. And that's what we're going to should be remembering as well, that one day the Lord's going to carry us home. To be with him forever, forever, forever. To never leave the portals of heaven. If you're not a Christian, become that child of God and begin your life of living it for the Lord, and be prepared when those days of discouragement come. And understand that the Lord is with us. Understand we can learn from discouragement and we can help others. Or as a Christian, maybe you just need prayers. Elijah prayed. The Lord answered. We can pray and encourage each other as well. Either way, if that need is something tonight we'd help you with, come as we stand and sing. Thank you for coming back this afternoon. Glad you're here. You can be back Wednesday at 7 o'clock for our midweek service.